Chag Sameach. I'll continue a tradition this morning by eulogizing somebody who recently died. This morning I won't be speaking about somebody from within the Jewish community. I'm sure you are surprised. But I wanted to share with you the values of somebody with whom I was surprised when I started reading about him after his death. This morning, I'd like to take a few minutes to remember Sir Roger Moore. Roger Moore was born on October 14th, 1927 in Stockwell, London. I could talk to you about his upbringing, his education, his military service, his acting career, but let's be serious. Roger Moore is best known for playing the film role of James Bond. As a matter of fact, he played that title character in 7 James Bond films, still the most by any single actor. His career as the smooth-talking, gadget-engaging, womanizing British spy spanned 12 years, from 1973 to 1985. I knew about his career as the famous 007. Then came the surprises. Surprises that I'd like to highlight this morning as we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Jerusalem and the losses that we endured during the Six-Day War. Roger Moore first traveled to Israel in the late 1960s and received a personal guided tour from Teddy Kollek, the then mayor of Jerusalem, and I would argue famous in his own right. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall during the conversations between those two men. Moore kept a strong connection with the state of Israel his entire life. And in 1991, when Moore was named UNICEF ambassador, that's the United Nations Children Fund, as a UNICEF ambassador, he refused to bow to international pressure to stop supporting Israel. In 2009, he served as the guest of honor at the Eilat Chamber Music Festival. Then, against public opinion, he donated his fee to the Jerusalem AIDS Project and HIV in Africa that helped an Israeli medical initiative that brought male circumcision training and delivery models to Africa to reduce the spread of HIV and AIDS. Up until that point, I myself have always tried to not give money to UNICEF because of the tremendous overlap that I've seen between UNICEF supporters and Israel bashing. But Moore showed one can support UNICEF and support Israel. It doesn't have to be a choice. Each one of us has the power to decide which are the choices that we have to face. And just because people around us say that we can't hold two ideas or two causes in our minds and hearts at the same time, that doesn't make it true. Perhaps the most famous and personally entertaining story circulating about Roger Moore was written by Londoner Mark Hayes. I will now read it as it was reprinted at CNN.com. And I quote, "As a 7-year-old in about 1983, in the days before first-class lounges at airports, I was with my granddad in Nice Airport and saw Roger Moore sitting at the departure gate reading a paper. I told my granddad I'd just seen James Bond and asked if we could go over so I could get his autograph. My granddad had no idea who James Bond was or who Roger Moore was, so we walked over and he popped me in front of Roger Moore with the words, 'My grandson says you're famous, can you sign this?' As charming as you'd expect, Roger asks my name and duly signs the back of my plane ticket, a fulsome note full of best wishes. I'm ecstatic, but as we head back to our seats, I glance down at the signature. It's hard to decipher it, but it definitely doesn't say James Bond. My granddad looks at it, half figures it out, says the words Roger Moore. I have absolutely no idea who that is, and my heart sinks. I tell my granddad he's signed it wrong, that he's put someone else's name, so my granddad heads right back to Roger Moore, holding the ticket which he's only just signed. I remember staying by our seats, and my granddad saying, "He says you've signed the wrong name. He says your name is James Bond." Roger Moore's face crinkled up with the realization, and he beckoned me over to his chair. When I was by his knee, he leaned over, looked from side to side, raised an eyebrow, and in a hushed voice said to me, "I have to sign my name as Roger Moore, because otherwise Blofeld might find out that I was here." He asked me not to tell anyone that I'd just seen James Bond, and he thanked me for keeping his secret. I went back to our seats, my nerves absolutely jangling with delight. My granddad asked me if he'd signed James Bond. "No," I said, "I'd got it wrong. After all, I was working with James Bond now." Many, many years later, I was working as a screenwriter on a recording that involved UNICEF, and Roger Moore was doing a piece to camera as an ambassador. He was completely lovely, and while the cameramen were setting up, I told him in passing the story of when I met him in Nice airport. He was happy to hear it, and he had a chuckle and said, "Well, I don't remember, but I'm glad you got to meet James Bond." So that was lovely. And then he did something so brilliant. After the filming, he walked past me in the corridor, heading out to his car. But as he got level, he paused, looked both ways, raised an eyebrow, and in a hushed voice said, "Of course I remember our meeting in Nice, but I didn't say anything in there because those cameramen, any one of them could be working for Blofeld." I was as delighted at 30 as I had been at 7 years old. What a man, what a tremendous man. End of quotes. We don't have to choose between being adults and believing in James Bond. And we don't have to choose between supporting Israel and supporting children in Africa. We can't accept those as mutually exclusive ideas. For our sake and for the benefit of the world. As Jews, and I would argue as rational thinking human beings, we are obligated to make decisions for ourselves. And on this 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War, we can never, ever compromise our support for the state of Israel and for our extended family, our brothers and sisters that live there in the land of Israel. Thank you, Roger Moore, for reminding us about that important lesson. May the memory of Roger Moore always be a blessing. May God comfort his family, and let us say, Amen.